Hello, BookTube. Who's up for some more random Hedgehog book recommendations? I already know the answer to that question. You all are. So let's talk about a few books, just at random, and see if any of them strike your fancy. Maybe they, I've been hearing, I get emails about this series of videos from everybody, all and sundry, every day. And quite a few of you mentioned that, oh my God, I'd completely forgotten about that book. And now it feels like something I would really like to read. Great. If I can do that, great. So we'll start with an oldie but a goodie. This is Doc Savage, The Man of Bronze. And this is a pulp novel about the titular character, Clark Savage. This is an adventure. It's an adventure story. He has a team of helpers, a team of men who help him out. They're all caricatures. They all have various expertise. And then there's Savage himself, who is the pinnacle of all expertise. He's huge. He towers over his men. He's been trained since infancy to be superhuman. In every way, mentally, physically, even morally. So the key thing to understand about Doc Savage's cast of lieutenants, which I've always found that cast a little annoying. They're not nearly as funny as the author of these books thought they were. I guess they were probably with readers. That must be the reason that they're there. And maybe they're there for comic relief, because Clark Savage himself is not a comic figure. The key to remember about his lieutenants, with their sword fighting skill or their physical strength or their skill with chemistry and science or whatnot, is that Doc Savage alone himself exceeds them all. He is certainly the strongest human being on Earth. He is certainly the most nimble, most fastest, most quick-witted, most expertised human on Earth. With gold eyes and bronze skin and gold hair. I often wish that Doc Savage had received a little more serious treatment here than he gets as to what he is. But I'm happy to take this and all other Doc Savage adventures just for what they are, which is usually rip-snorting, good page-turning fun. It's just, as is the case with many pulp characters, I never read a Doc Savage novel, without thinking, boy, there's a lot of untapped potential here. You might think the same way, but I bet you'll enjoy it. I bet you'll enjoy it. I guess what I'm trying to say here is heretical, which is that a really good piece of Doc Savage pastiche fiction would be wonderful. That would be absolutely wonderful. If we could have a Doc Savage pastiche novel in which his band of loyal lieutenants are ever so slightly afraid of him, if in their darkest moments, maybe drunk or maybe in peril, they wonder if he's completely human. I could almost write such a story myself. I'm fascinated by Doc Savage himself, but any of the novels, they won't give you that, but they'll give you lots of entertainment. And then we have Jennifer Cation Armstrong. I've talked about many of these books on this channel before, but you just can't get enough of that, so we'll keep going. This is Marion Lou and Rhoda and Ted. This is a history of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. You don't get enough books like this. You really don't. Network shows, cable shows now, they're loaded, they're carpeted with non-disclosure agreements to everybody. Or, before NDAs were so common, the informal, unspoken NDA, which was, if you talk about how the sausage is made on this show, you'll never get hired for another show. It's a rare thing to have such a frank book about such a popular show. For those of you who are from born in the 21st century, Mary Tyler Moore Show was a comedy, a sitcom in the 20th century. It was very, very good. It had a wonderful, wonderful cast, lots of good writing, and this is all about how it happened. And it doesn't pull punches. Where there's ugliness involved, it doesn't pull punches. But also where there's wonder involved. It's just delightful. The kind of entertainment biography that I wish we had more of. Then we have I pulled the cover of the vintage classic here. This is Allison Lurri. This is her big breakout book, The War Between the Tates. Pardon the hideous cover here. This isn't what my mass market paperback looked when I first read it. And this is a story about a modern, that would be the term that would be used, but it's now It's now antiquary. It's now 60 years old. A modern divorce. The Tates are the quintessential, 2.5 children, white picket fence, perfectly happy family. And then the husband rips it all apart with his stupid behavior. I lost track when this book was a phenomenon and it was getting reviewed everywhere a long, long, long time ago. I lost track of how many reviews I read that said that the family, that forces tore the family apart like they were in an earthquake. No. I fired off a letter to the editor, 2 of those reviews. Didn't get any printed. But I wanted to say no to all of them. No, it's the decisions of one person in this book that does this. But nevertheless, it is the dissection of what happens when you pull apart a family. And it's really well done. And I would imagine that some of the truths, the emotional truths of what happens when this happens to a family are eternal and won't date at all. I haven't reread The War Between the Tates in a long time. I really should. I'll have to see if I can find a copy. It won't be this. It won't be this cover, but I'll have to see if I can find a copy. Then we have something by M.A. Harper. I've recommended this book many, many times before. It's out of print. I think it was only printed once. I don't think I've ever had a paperback, or if it did, the paperback was only printed once, and it'll never be in print again. But it's wonderful. It's For the Love of Robert E. Lee, an intensely Southern fiction novel about a young girl who falls in love with the dashing portrait of a young Robert E. Lee. That is Robert E. Lee on the cover from when he was in the Mexican War with all of his future opponents from the American Civil War. And the main character of this book falls in love with that dashing lieutenant. And we see, through that lens, we see not only his story, but also the Southification of his story, the mythologizing of his story, and also her story, her family story, which is every bit as touching. If she hadn't had that infatuation with Robert E. Lee, if that hadn't been the gimmick of this book, it would still have been wonderful. I loved it. I would love to find a copy. I haven't seen a hardcover copy in forever. I recommend it a lot, but I don't actually have a copy. Then we have something by Michael Hoskin. This is about William and Carolyn Herschel. This is called Discoverers of the Universe. It's about William Herschel was an astronomer at the very birth of the modern iteration of that discipline. The very birth of it, not as early as Galileo, but well before, when the whole universe was there to be mapped and named and understood. And he extended his mind and his math out into that universe to try to do that, and his sister did too. Carolyn Herschel did too. Eventually gaining as much skill as he had. Their story together is wonderful. I have comparatively little patience for the handful of biographies of Carolyn Herschel that I've read alone, standalone biographies of just her, that act like her brother was riding her coattails. I have precious little patience for that. We don't do anybody any good by lying about history that way. I could wish the same as you, that not that Carolyn Herschel had been a man, but that Carolyn Herschel as a woman had had her curiosity indulged and her insights honored the same way as her brother. We can all wish that there had been no sexism, not only then, but ever. We could all wish that. But it wasn't true. And this book does that wonderfully. It captures the essence not only of her discoveries, but of her growth. Wonderfully. Really a pair of characters you should get to know. Then we have Anne Rice. I've recommended this book many times. I've recommended a lot of these times before. This is The Mummy, or Ramses the Damned. And this is a story where Anne Rice decides she's just going to work her way through the universal monsters. So she's done vampires to death. And in this story, in the 19th century, a typical 19th century British explorer finds a mummy in the Valley of Kings and has it propped up against the wall right there in his room when he is murdered by a treacherous colleague. And the mummy sees it happen, because the mummy is not dead. The mummy needs only exposure to the air and sunlight to begin to revive. Ramses begins to come back to life. And it's not, typical Anne Rice fashion, it is not a shambling creature all wrapped in bandages. He ends up being super sexy and totally alluring. And it's amazingly well done. It's amazingly well done. You would think, well, if the mummy involved is not a shambling monster that just moans and chases after Christopher Lee, if it's not that, then it's not going to be any good. No, No, this is really, really good. Including, as I've mentioned many times before, once the mummy makes connection with the typical heroine of the piece, she and one other person try to convey to him how much time has passed since he last walked around in the world. They tried to convey that to him, and it made that passage and a couple of other bits in this book made me realize just how disassociated such a person would be. The Ramses lived in a world without zero. Without a zero. Just that alone, imagine that alone, how hard that would make it to make him understand how long has passed since he was last walking around. But it's not an intellectual exercise. This is actually a really, really good page turner of a novel. Then we have, this is a great big book by John Gribben. This is, it actually features the Herschels, brother and sister. This is The Scientists. It's a history of scientists constantly striving, having wrong ideas, fixing them, pushing the boundaries with state assistance and without it, constantly in the teeth of organized religion, except for the members of the scientific community who were members of organized religion. It tells a lot of their stories in a potted format. It's really good. It's a big book, but it's a wonderful one stop for you to read the human story of science. And it's well done. And then we have something by Roger Payne. This is a little bit of an older book. This is called Among Whales, where he writes about his experience with the whales of the world. He's not ever among whales, obviously. As other natural history writers have pointed out, we see whales for 1/100th of their life. We see them when they're at the surface breathing and maybe mating. But most of their life, we're not among them, and we can't conceive it. Really, we can't conceive it. We don't know what really happens. But as much as a human can be among whales, Roger Payne is among them, and he writes wonderfully about it. This is, again, another example of a book on this Hedgehog recommendation list that I wish I had. I don't have a copy of this. I know that I would revisit this if I did, but the Brattle will provide. Then we have something I definitely do have, and I've shown you this many, many times. I've recommended it a million times. I will recommend it here again. It is World Poetry, an anthology of verse from antiquity to our time. Catherine Washburn and John Major are the editors, and the general editor is Clifton Fadiman. This is a big, fat book, orange and yellow. It is a poetry anthology like no other that you will ever read. It's got all the people that you would expect, although a lot of those people are poets in translation, and for a lot of those translations, the translations are not usual. They're weird or interpretive. And there's also a huge amount of poetry in here that you will not find anywhere in an anthology. And poetry from all over the world, in all different kinds of shapes and sizes, with all different kinds of ends. It's an eye-opening education. You will never get to the end of this book. You'll never be exhausted completely. I'm sure you'll have your favorites. Some of your favorites will be in here. The wonderful thing about this book is how few of your favorites will be in here. New favorites, yes. But and then we can finish up with another thing that I've recommended on this channel many times. This is Gary Jennings. This is his book, The Journeyer. And this is a novel about Marco Polo. A big, fat, opulent historical novel that follows Marco Polo from when he was a young teenager all the way to the other side of the world and all the way through his adventures, and gives him a whole bunch of adventures that even he didn't narrate in his book. You do not need to know anything about Marco Polo to read this book, but the more you know Marco Polo's own book, the more you will like this, I think. At least the more, there are a couple of Easter eggs in here, more than a couple, there are a dozen Easter eggs in here that you won't really get unless you know Marco Polo's book, but you need not know it. What a story this is. What an amazing narrative. What an overwhelmingly amazing narrative it is. The kind of big, opulent historical novel that you just want to lose yourself in. And when you're done, in addition to having a fantastic historical novel under your belt, there will be the added benefit that this will almost certainly make you want to read Marco Polo's book if you haven't already. So we'll end with that. We'll end on a really, really strong note. This is just terrific. Just a terrific, if you can find it. There are all sorts of, I think there was a trade paperback that was kind of ugly. And that was the old 1970s mass market paperback, or 1980s mass market paperback that was not ugly, had beautiful wraparound cover artwork, but it's probably hard to find. Mass market paperbacks are harder and harder to find. But anyway, there you go. There's more Hedgehog book recommendations to carry you along. So we'll wrap this up and we'll meet again next time. Thank you, BookTube.